All right, everybody, my second guest here on the show this week. Of course, we're previewing the TCU Michigan semifinal matchup. I'm joined by Locked On Horned Frogs host, Stephen Simcox. You can check him out every single day. And Stephen, I appreciate you coming on the show and previewing TCU.
Yeah, Philip, thanks for having me, man. It's a fun time of year, just kind of coming off Christmas here, and it's been a long wait before this playoff game, so I'm excited to talk some football with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, we preview these games, we talk about these games, especially for you going every single day. It just kind of be, and this is dropping on Wednesday, so just a few days away. You got to be very excited because now you get close to the game happening and all the excitement that's around that.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, having and it's typical with bowl games, right? Like you get about a month off, maybe not this long, but at least a few weeks. But the magnitude of this game is so big, and it felt weird because like the first couple weeks after the playoff was announced, I honestly didn't talk about it a whole lot, just because I knew like there was going to be so much time in between. But I'm curious to see how both teams kind of get after it, and it should be fun on New Year's Eve. So obviously, the TCU fans are stoked to see this team get back in action following that loss in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, we'll jump into that second. Just, for everybody out there listening or watching, tell us about Locked On Horned Frogs, what they can expect if they, leave this and want to go check you out some more when we get done here.
So we're on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. It is Locked On Horned Frogs, and then on Twitter, the show handle is at Locked On TCU. We tweet the show out, just about every day as much as we can, and so it's audio and video. You can get on your regular podcast platform, but it's just daily coverage of TCU athletics. Obviously, this fall it's been heavy into football, and the basketball team is off to a pretty nice start too. But the TCU football team's having a historic run. So that's what we're talking about a lot right now. Just came off, early signing day, and then now full steam into this preview against Michigan that's coming up this weekend.
Yeah, and just talking about this TCU season and coming to the season, and look, I'll be honest. If you would have told me that the three of these teams would be here, I wouldn't have been surprised. But I think a lot of people out there surprised with TCU the run they went on this year. And I was even before our conversation, I still have my preseason magazines. I started going through them. So where was TCU projected? And a lot of them will say I had them at 7 or 8. But what were your expectations coming into the season? New head coach Sonny Dykes after the long tenure of Coach Patterson there. What were your expectations coming into the season for this team?
Before the year, I predicted they would go 7-5, and I felt pretty good about that. I mean, they were 5-7 last year, Philip, and there are years where a team might finish 5-7 or 4-8, and you come away from it thinking, well, they were just a few plays away from maybe winning 7 or 8 games, right? Like they were in a lot of close games, they just couldn't quite figure out how to get over the hump and win. But that wasn't the case last year. I mean, TCU got blown out, honestly, more than a few times. They weren't super competitive against the top teams in the Big 12. Gary Patterson gets let go in sort of the middle of the season, and he had been there for 20-plus years. So there was a lot of uncertainty around, bringing in a new coach, bringing in Sonny Dykes, which when they hired him, I thought it made sense. I was honestly a little bit underwhelmed because Sonny had a tough tenure at Cal, and then he really did a nice job at SMU, but his SMU teams seemed to start out really well and then kind of fade towards the end of the season. But I think what I didn't really realize about Sonny is what a great coaching staff he had put together in the past, and just he's a really good CEO. But all that to say, I thought the offense would be better, and that would help get them to a bowl game and maybe pull off an upset or two, and it would be a successful season in year one. I did not see this coming at all. And the defense, which for such a long time, Coach Patterson, that was what his teams hung their hat on. It had really fallen off in his last season. And so I thought their biggest struggle was going to be finding a way to rebuild that unit. But Joe Gillespie has come over from Tulsa and has done a nice job. I mean, they haven't been necessarily the elite defenses that you from a stats perspective that you see from the other playoff teams, but they've kind of found a way to make big stops when they needed to. And yeah, I mean, it's just been a season of surprises. Like Max Duggan did not win the job out of fall camp. They actually named Chandler Morris the starter, and most people expected that. Like Max had kind of struggled the first few years of his career, and he ends up being a Heisman finalist. The offense took a huge step forward and was really balanced in the rushing and passing game. And the defense, I think, gained more confidence as the year gone on. And I remember when they beat K State, they came back and won that game, and they got to 7-0. And I thought, man, they're like, there's 5 games left, and they're probably going to be favored in most of them. And they ended up running the table in the regular season. So they pulled out some close ones and just kind of kept finding a way to stay undefeated until that Big 12 title game. So an incredible season so far, and yeah, you certainly are not alone in not expecting this team to be here. And I didn't even really start to believe it until about halfway through the year as they just kept piling up these wins. But the Coach Dykes and the coaching staff has just done an amazing job of getting guys to buy in and kind of maximizing the talent they have on this roster.
Yeah, you may have just answered my next question with this because I was going to ask you what point in the season was it when you felt this team could be special? And you said Kansas State 7-0. I mean, just me
Mhm.
as the kind of guy. I mean, don't watch TCU every week, but the big games, obviously, I was checking them out, and I remember seeing what they did to Oklahoma. And that's that time of the season we still thought Oklahoma was good.
Sure.
Obviously, it didn't turn out the way. And I will admit that was my Big 12 champion prediction. I will
Mhm.
come up here and own that here on the show today. But so I saw that, and then Texas. And I know Texas is not a great team, but it was the way they beat Texas 17-10, I believe was the score. It was a
Mhm.
defensive game. I think some people looked at TCU, outsiders, not people that follow TCU like yourself, as an explosive offense team in the defense. That was a really good defense performance because Texas has some dudes. But if it wasn't Kansas State, where was another moment this year with this TCU team? You said, okay, this team is special. This is a national title contender.
Right. I mean, they had a stretch around that time, so they beat Oklahoma, as you said, and yeah, OU ended up having a tough year, but that still was kind of a statement, like, oh wow, this is maybe this team is for real. And then they played 3 straight games. They got Kansas on the road, and then Oklahoma State and K State back to back, and they won all 3 of those games. They're all close. They all had to come back. They were trailing in the second half of all those contests. Oklahoma State, they were down 14 in the fourth quarter. To K State, they were down 18 in late in the first half, and they just sort of found a way to win in each of those. And I think like that was sort of the moment where I was like, man, the schedule's going to get a little easier after this. And they just seem to be getting more confident and better as the year goes on. And the Texas game was another one. Yeah, UT, they certainly have a lot of talent, and TCU was 7-point underdogs in that game. Game day was there. Like Arch Manning was in town. It was supposed to be one of the many moments that has kind of come up in the last few years, unfortunately for the Horns. But it was supposed to be, okay, this is it, right? Like this is the time
Mhm.
where Steve Sarkisian gets Texas on the map again, and we start talking about the Longhorns dominating the Big 12 as they sort of leave for the SEC. And they won that game. It wasn't pretty, but they hung in there. They held Texas to only 3 offensive points and really kind of dominated the second half. I mean, if not for a scoop and score by UT at the end there, it probably would have ended like 17-3. But anyway, they won that game to get to 10-0. The next week they pull out like a totally you just highway robbery against Baylor, kicking a field goal as time expires
Mhm.
to win that game by a point. But yeah, there were a lot of moments. I mean, they never really blinked. Like I think that's kind of the hallmark of this team. And I know it sounds cliche, and people kind of get bored with cliches, but they faced a lot of deficits. There have been multiple times this year where it's like, okay, this is kind of where the Cinderella story ends for them, and they found a way to come back and win. But yeah, I mean, I think that stretch of winning games against KU and Oklahoma State and K State in 3 straight weeks, and having to come back in each game was sort of the time where I started to look at the schedule and say, okay, maybe they can pull this off, and maybe this is just like a team of destiny because they keep finding a way to win these football games.
So, looking at the Fiesta Bowl matchup between TCU and Michigan, I want to start off with the TCU defense versus the Michigan offense. Of course, they're kind of an old school team. They're a really big offensive line, if not the best, one of the best offensive lines in college football. Like I said, they want to run the ball with Donovan Edwards, who's rushing over 200 yards a game. When you look at the TCU defense, I mean, they got some guys there too as well. Got a lot of guys in second. Josh Newton, you got Hodgin Tomlinson in the secondary. Johnny Hodges at linebacker, Big 12 newcomer year. I think a lot of people don't really realize there's a lot of really good players on this TCU defense. I think that's an underrated aspect of going into this game. But anyways, for you, the TCU defense versus the Michigan offense, what are you looking at? What kind of matchups are you looking at for that?
Well, you talked about it. I mean, it all starts with, can you find a way to slow down this rushing attack, which has been so good all year. And yeah, Blake Corum was a Heisman type candidate for most of the season, and Donovan Edwards has kind of gone in there, and I think it's honestly maybe brought like a more explosive element to their running game, even if it's not the consistency that you saw earlier in the season. But TCU runs a 3-3-5 system, and so my first real question here is, does Joe Gillespie get away from that? Now he has a lot of players that can play kind of hybrid roles within that scheme, but does he put four down linemen on the line of scrimmage more often than you would typically see to try to account for this run game, to try to slow down that offensive line and not allow them to get to the second level so easily? Yeah, the linebacker crew has been good this year. You know, Johnny Hodges is a really cool story. He was a Naval Academy player and decided he wanted to transfer, sent an email to a bunch of FBS schools just saying, hey, does anybody want to take a chance on me? And Northwestern and TCU are the only two that kind of got back to him, but he ends up at TCU and has a fantastic season. I think he's built for a game like this. There's another big linebacker, Shadrack Banks, who I feel like could hold up with the physicality of this Michigan team. I think Michigan is on another level from a physicality standpoint than anybody they've seen. So I'm not necessarily comparing this team, but this is the best comparison I can think of based on TCU's schedule, which is, Texas with Bijan Robinson really tried to run at the teeth of that defense, and they weren't successful. Now, other teams like Baylor and Kansas State have had more success using some misdirection, using some counter concepts, getting to the edges and running on this TCU defense. So can TCU shore that up and not allow those explosive plays in the run game? I think on the back end, I feel like that's a matchup that they can have success. Travis Hodges-Tomlinson won the Thorpe Award. Josh Newton, who you mentioned, is another really good corner. Those guys are used to playing in man coverage. They like playing, up on receivers, pressing those guys. So if they can hold their own along with the safeties in the passing game without a lot of help, then can your front seven kind of find a way to at least slow down this Michigan offense? And I've said this. Michigan fans have found my YouTube channel and have been pretty boisterous with me the last few days, which is awesome. That's what college football is about. But a lot of them have pointed out that JJ McCarthy can, he can throw the ball, like he's a talented QB. And I get that. I just think if you're going to lose this football game, it has to be because Michigan made plays in the passing game. Like, you have to force them to get off schedule and not just live in second and manageable and third and manageable and drop back and throw the football. And if they beat you that way, then hey, that's just how it is sometimes. If this running game just slices them up, then it's going to be a long day, and it's going to be really tough for TCU to find a way to win. So I think if they can kind of hold their own up front, then they do have, some opportunities and some advantages with that secondary that I feel like is built to match up in some one-on-one situations pretty well.
And you talk about that, put it on JJ McCarthy, especially if you force them to throw the ball and you get to him. So who on this TCU defense you see as guys that could cause that pressure? Because then you get a quarterback like that, he has to rush the throw, and then you've got that experience, that talented secondary TCU has. Then you create some mistakes, and then that creates some short fields, some more opportunities for your offense.
Yeah, so Dylan Horton has been the guy on the defensive line that has caused a lot of havoc, getting sacks. The light bulbs really come on for him this year. So if they're just going to do it in the more traditional way, I think it'll be him. Dominic Williams is a solid nose tackle, but he's not, bullying guys on the interior back to the quarterback a ton. And then D Winters, has been successful coming in on blitzes. Joe Gillespie doesn't like to use simulated pressure a lot. I don't know how much he'll adjust that given kind of the way Michigan plays, but those are the two guys that sort of live in the backfield. If you're talking about getting a pass rush and getting to the quarterback, I think those would be the players that would make it happen.
So when we flip it over to the TCU offense versus Michigan defense, and I like to say this is strength versus strength. best part of the TCU's team, and really, as much as we just talked about the Michigan offense and what Jay McCarthy does, their strength is their defense. Only giving up 13 points a game, and they're really good against run around 85 yards a game. Oh, what's the big matchup there? You've got the Heisman finalist and then Max Duggan. You have a very underrated player at running back, I think, in Kendre Miller, over 1,300 yards, 17 touchdowns. But for you, looking at that matchup, how can TCU attack this Michigan defense?
Well, the kind of the game plan for defenses in the second half of the season against TCU has been bringing a lot of pressure and trying to force Max Duggan to get the ball out quickly. This offensive line has been really good this year. I think they're better, getting downhill and blocking in the run game than they are in pass protection. So Quentin Johnston, though, is really the key to me. I mean, he's their big first round type talent at wide receiver. He's been super effective with explosive plays this year. And so if they can get the ball downfield to him, that would be, a great way to get this offense going. And then you mentioned the run game. I mean, Kendre Miller has been a really fantastic back for them. They also have Amari DiMercato as the guy that can come in and give Kendre a breather. They have not been as efficient in the run game lately. They have to get back to that to allow this offense to work. And then Max is he's become a lot more of a pocket passer this year. But when the chips were down in that game against K-State, you saw him get back to sort of what he did early in his career, which was make things happen with his legs. And plays would break down and he would escape the pocket and run. And so I wonder if that's a wrinkle. They haven't used him as much in the design run game as the previous staff did. But now that they've had some rest, now that he's healthier than he's been in a while, I think I would expect some more of that, some more QB counter, some QB power, just something where Michigan has to account for him as an extra player in the game who can get it done, not just with his arm, but with his legs. But TCU's got a talented receiving core on the outside. I mentioned Johnson, Darius Davis and Tay Barber, guys that also have had big seasons. So can they win those matchups? Can they be efficient in the passing game and move the chains? This is the way I think they're going to have to win the football game, is by scoring a lot of points, because that's, as you said, strength on strength. And so can they have an advantage there and get it done and really push this Michigan defense and force the Michigan offense to keep scoring? That'll be a huge key in this one.
If you look at the last two games for Ohio State, for Michigan, they have given up over 300 yards. Purdue threw it on. Purdue had to settle for a lot of field goals. They had to kick 5 field goals in that game. They turned them into touchdowns. That's a different game in the Big Ten championship game. And I know that the score was 45-23, Michigan won, but that game was still competitive going to the fourth quarter. So I think there is evidence. I mean, you can throw on Michigan and move the ball. It's just you got to make sure you score touchdowns and not field goals like Purdue did, and don't turn the ball over like Ohio State did.
Right. I mean, red zone efficiency will be a big key. And, I think the trap the offense has fallen into the last few weeks when they've kind of slowed down has just been relying on those big plays. So can you sustain a 10 or 12 play drive? That's what Michigan is going to try to force you to do. And a lot of that will be predicated on the run game. And if they can get, 4 or 5 yards carry and sort of set up their passing game with what they're doing on the ground.
So the final question here, not a prediction, as I told you off there. Would not ask you to predict the game as it's coming out on Wednesday. But let's say TCU wins this game. They beat Michigan. How did they do it?
Well, I think, in that scenario, you're talking about a team that was able to find a way to slow down Donovan Edwards and force Michigan to throw the football. Joe Gillespie, had some sort of plan or scheme that gave Michigan fits in the run game, and then just making plays on the offensive side of the ball. Max Duggan has a big day. Quentin Johnston has a big day, scoring over 30 points. And I think the defense just kind of stepping up when they have to and making the stops they need to. I do wonder, I'm curious to see what the pace of this is. I know Michigan is a really explosive team, but I also know they run the ball a lot. And so they're going to try to keep TCU's offense off the field. TCU kind of sneakily, they'll do that too. Like, they'll slow things down and try to give their defense a breather. So I'm curious to see how both these teams kind of come out in that chess match. But yeah, if TCU wins, then I think you're talking about a career day from this defense and just an efficient offensive performance that was similar to what they've done all year, which is get big plays and and score a lot of points.
Well, it's going to be fun this Saturday. I'm glad that the playoff games are on this Saturday. It's going to feel like a regular college football season day. Having games on Saturday, how it should be, which should be a lot of fun. And this has been a lot of fun, Stephen, talking to you, breaking down the TCU Horned Frogs. But if the listeners and viewers want to check out, where can they find you and all the work you're doing?
It's Locked On Horned Frogs. That's the show. So yeah, we're on YouTube. We're on our favorite podcast platform. And thanks so much, Phil, for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it. And I look forward to talking again sometime down the road.
Sounds good. Go Frogs.
Hold up. Video's not over with yet. Not quite yet. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe on YouTube. Phillip Jordan Show YouTube channel. Also hit the bell for all the notifications. And if you leave a comment on the video, including this one or many other ones here on the channel, I'll read it on a future edition of the show. You can also check out the show over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your audio content. Just hit the subscribe button over there or follow whichever one they're asking us to do now. Hey, and also rate the show. I would appreciate 5 stars. 4 stars, you were just a straight up hater. And look, if you don't like the show, I guess you can give it a 1 star as well. But leave a review. I read those on the show as well. Really would appreciate you guys doing that. Follow me on social media at pjordansec. Hey, and also you can email me, sports.phillipjordan@gmail.com. Now you guys can go find another video to watch. Hopefully one here on the channel, or wherever you're going next. But please do that. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, leave a comment, and check out the audio podcast.